My name is Rachel, and tonight I am telling a story I never thought I would have the courage to say out loud. It is not because I want attention or sympathy, but because for years I have been carrying the weight of other people's choices, and my silence has only allowed them to pile more onto my shoulders. I am tired of being the dependable one, the invisible one, the sister who everyone assumes will pick up the pieces whenever life gets messy. I am sharing this not just for myself, but for anyone who has ever felt trapped in a family role they never asked for. It happened on what was supposed to be a casual Saturday dinner at my parents' house. The smell of roasted chicken mixed with the faint sweetness of apple pie drifted through the air. The table was crowded with mismatched dishes, the kind we had been eating off since childhood. The hum of the ceiling fan, the clinking of silverware, the laughter of children running through the hallway, it was all so ordinary. And yet, in one sharp moment, that ordinariness shattered. My sister, Melanie, stood up from her chair, one hand resting dramatically on her stomach, her smile wide and glowing under the dim yellow light of the chandelier. She looked around the table, savoring the anticipation, then announced with pride that she was pregnant again, her fifth child. The room erupted with cheers, applause, and words of congratulations. My mother gasped and clutched her pearls. My father clapped his hands together, and even my brother-in-law leaned back with a smug grin like he had just scored a touchdown. Everyone celebrated. Everyone except me. I sat frozen in my chair, the fork in my hand hovering above mashed potatoes gone cold. My chest tightened as if someone had pressed a block of ice against my ribs. Outwardly, I forced a smile, because that is what I had always done. But inside, a fire raged. My pulse hammered in my ears, my palms grew damp, and my throat ached with unspoken words. To anyone else, her announcement would have been just another family milestone. But to me, it was a sentence, because I knew exactly what would follow. The late-night phone calls asking me to babysit just for an hour. The weekends spent changing diapers while she and her husband went out. The excuses about money, the endless hand-me-down requests, the expectation that my life should bend to fit around hers. I had been living this cycle for 8 years, and now she had just signed me up for another round without asking. The cheers and laughter around me grew louder, filling the space like static in my head. My niece tugged at my sleeve, asking if she could sit in my lap, and I gently lifted her onto my knee. Her hair smelled like crayons and shampoo. She nestled into me with the kind of comfort that said I was more than just an aunt. I was a stand-in parent. My chest ached because I loved those children fiercely, but love had become the leash tying me to a responsibility that was never mine to begin with. I glanced at Melanie. She basked in the attention, one hand fluttering to her hair, the other patting her stomach like a crown jewel. Her eyes never once flicked to me. She did not have to. She already assumed I would fall in line, that I would help her again without protest. My parents' glowing smiles told me they assumed the same thing. I felt my jaw tighten. I placed my fork down carefully on the plate, the sound sharp in the sudden lull between laughs. My fingers trembled slightly, but I steadied them on the edge of the table. A thought crystallized in my mind, clearer than ever before. This is the moment I stop being silent. "Who's going to take care of the baby this time?" I asked, my voice calm but carrying across the table. For a split second, the room went quiet, as if even the children sensed the weight of my words. My mother's smile faltered. My father cleared his throat. Melanie blinked at me, confused, her lips parting like she had not expected the question. I let the silence stretch. My heart pounded, but I held their gaze. For years, I had been the dependable one, the safety net, the unpaid babysitter, the invisible backbone. But now, in this dimly lit dining room, I decided that if I did not speak, I would drown. I looked down at my niece in my lap, at her small hands gripping my shirt. I loved her and her siblings more than words could explain. But love had become my trap, and I could no longer pretend it was enough to justify the way I was treated. The silence finally cracked when Melanie laughed nervously. "Well, obviously we'll all pitch in. Rachel, you're so good with kids, you—" That was the moment I knew the script had not changed. They all expected me to sacrifice again, but this time something inside me had shifted. And what I did next silenced the room in a way that no pregnancy announcement ever could. The silence at the table after my question clung to the air like heavy fog. My mother quickly forced a smile, trying to smooth over the crack in the celebration, but I could see the tension in the way she twisted her napkin. Melanie, still standing with one hand on her stomach, laughed nervously and tried to brush off my words as if they were nothing more than a bad joke. I leaned back in my chair, my niece still perched on my lap, and let my eyes drift around the room. It was as if I were seeing everything through a sharper lens. The chipped edge of the dining table where my father once scolded me for spilling juice, the crooked picture frame of our family portrait where I stood in the far corner, almost cropped out by accident, the faint hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen that always seemed louder when arguments broke out. The truth was, this moment had been building for years. My frustration did not appear out of nowhere. It had been layered like bricks, one incident stacked on top of another, until the weight became unbearable. When Melanie had her first child, I was 23, freshly out of college, barely keeping up with rent while juggling 2 part-time jobs. I still remember the night she called, panicked because the baby would not stop crying and her husband had gone out drinking. I raced across town in my beat-up sedan, arriving at their apartment with bags under my eyes and no clue what to do. But somehow I soothed the baby, rocking him in my arms until he fell asleep. That night, Melanie sighed in relief and told me I was a natural. What she really meant was that she had found a convenient solution. By the time her second child came along, I had already become the built-in babysitter. Melanie would drop the kids off at my apartment on a Friday night with promises to return by morning. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she did not. I never knew whether to buy extra groceries or prepare the sofa for little bodies curled up under blankets. Once, she left them with me for 3 straight days, claiming she needed a break. I was furious, but when I saw those little faces pressed against my window waiting for her, I swallowed my anger. I told myself it was family, and family helped each other. The third child only deepened the pattern. Melanie insisted money was tight, so I found myself picking up extra shifts at work just to afford formula and diapers that mysteriously never seemed to be stocked in her home. She promised she would pay me back, but of course she never did. I convinced myself that maybe things would improve, that maybe once the children grew older, she would take more responsibility. Instead, she only grew more comfortable with leaning on me. The fourth child nearly broke me. That winter, the baby developed a fever late at night. Melanie called me instead of a doctor, claiming she was too tired to drive. I rushed over, bundled the baby in my arms, and stayed up all night, checking the temperature every hour while Melanie slept soundly in the next room. By morning, I was the one who carried the baby into urgent care while she complained about the wait time. I remember sitting in that sterile room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, realizing I had taken on the role of a parent without ever choosing it. Now here we were, at child number 5. Everyone's applause rang in my ears like mockery. The clinking of glasses and the chorus of congratulations felt like nails against a chalkboard. They celebrated while I replayed every sacrifice I had made, every moment I had been forced to put my own life on hold. I thought about the vacations I had canceled, the promotions I had passed up because I had to cover weekends, the relationships that fizzled out when boyfriends realized I was always tethered to someone else's children. My mother finally spoke, her voice soft but sharp. "Rachel, don't ruin this moment. It's a blessing." I turned toward her, studying the familiar lines of her face, the way her expression hardened whenever she thought I was being difficult. My father cleared his throat, as if to back her up, but he did not say much. He rarely did when it came to Melanie. She had always been their favorite, their golden child, the one they forgave for everything. I had always been the reliable one, the sturdy post they leaned on without ever asking if I was strong enough to hold them. Melanie sat back down, her smile faltering for the first time. She reached for her glass of water and sipped it slowly, pretending not to notice the tension simmering between us. My nieces and nephews laughed at something on the other side of the table, unaware of the storm swirling around the adults. I envied their innocence, their ability to live without realizing the sacrifices others made for them. Inside me, a battle raged. I wanted to scream, to list every single time I had been used, to demand that they acknowledge the toll it had taken on my life. But another part of me wanted to stay silent, to avoid the inevitable backlash, the accusations of being selfish or ungrateful. I stared down at my plate, the food untouched, my appetite gone. My hands itched to do something, slam the table, throw the fork, make them see. Instead, I steadied myself with a deep breath. What they did not know was that my patience had reached its end long before this dinner. Tonight was not the start of my breaking point. It was the moment I finally decided I would no longer play the role they had written for me. The tension at the table was just the surface. Beneath it was the history of a lifetime, and I was about to make sure they remembered every piece of it. This was not the first time I had felt the sting of being treated as an afterthought in my own family. And as I sat at that table with the sound of forced laughter ringing in my ears, memories began to rush back with startling clarity. The truth was, this announcement of Melanie's fifth child was not an isolated event, but the continuation of a long, painful history that stretched back farther than I wanted to admit. I thought of the Christmas when I was 17. Everyone was gathered in the living room, the smell of cinnamon candles filling the air, wrapping paper scattered across the floor. Melanie had just unwrapped an expensive camera, the exact one she had been begging for, and she squealed like a child, hugging our parents. When my turn came, I opened a small box to find socks and a $20 bill folded neatly in an envelope. "You're practical," my father said with a chuckle, as if that explained everything. I smiled politely, but inside, I burned with the realization that Melanie's desires were always prioritized, while my needs were minimized to whatever was cheapest and easiest. Then there was the summer I turned 21. I had been saving for months to take a short trip with friends, my first real vacation. Just days before I was supposed to leave, Melanie showed up crying at my apartment door, saying she had fallen behind on bills and her electricity was about to be shut off. She didn't ask me for help. She assumed it. I remember staring at my savings account balance, weighing my freedom against her desperation. In the end, I canceled my trip and handed her the money. A week later, I saw pictures of her and her husband at a beach resort, drinks in hand, smiling at the camera. When I confronted her, she laughed and said, "We just needed a break. You're so responsible, Rachel. You'll have your time someday." Someday never came. The patterns grew more obvious with every passing year. Melanie was the golden child, reckless but adored, while I was the steady anchor, useful only when others were sinking. Our parents reinforced the roles without even realizing it. My mother often told me, "You're stronger than she is. She needs more support." My father's favorite phrase was, "You don't complain, Rachel. That's why we can count on you." They dressed it up as praise, but it was really just a convenient excuse to pile more weight onto my shoulders. One of the worst moments came when I bought my first car, a modest used sedan I was proud of. I had scraped together every dollar by working double shifts and cutting corners. 2 months later, Melanie borrowed it because her own car was in the shop. Days turned into weeks, and when she finally returned it, there was a large dent in the side, and the interior smelled like fast food. She shrugged and said, "That's what insurance is for," without even apologizing. My premium doubled, and I was stuck paying for the damage while she moved on as if nothing had happened. I told myself I would draw a line, that I would never lend her anything again. But then the next crisis came, and once again I was pulled back in. These memories played like a cruel slideshow in my head as I watched my family celebrate Melanie's news. It was almost laughable how predictable it had become. She announced another baby. They clapped and cheered, and I was silently volunteered to pick up the slack. But this time, the anger did not fade into resignation. This time, the years of swallowed pride and quiet sacrifices hardened into something else: resolve. I studied Melanie across the table. Her smile had returned, though it didn't reach her eyes. She knew I was challenging her, even if no one else had caught on yet. My mother busied herself with pouring more drinks, pretending everything was fine, while my father leaned back in his chair with the expression of a man who hoped silence could erase discomfort. I realized then that they were all complicit. Melanie took advantage because she knew she could, and my parents let it happen because it was easier than confronting her. For years, I had told myself that speaking up would only cause a fight, that it was better to keep the peace and endure. But what peace had there really been? I thought about the nights I came home from long shifts to find my apartment filled with children who were not mine, about the holidays I spent alone while Melanie basked in the spotlight, about the times I gave up opportunities so she could stumble into another chance she did not deserve. What had silence ever given me besides exhaustion and resentment? As these memories flooded me, I felt a shift inside, like a locked door finally creaking open. I understood that this moment at the dinner table was not just about another baby. It was about every injustice that had piled up until I could barely breathe under the weight. It was about reclaiming my voice in a family that had learned to tune me out. I placed my napkin neatly on the table, a small but deliberate act. My heart raced, but my voice was steady as I said, "We all know how this goes. We cat, you celebrate, and then you expect me to give up my life to raise your kids. Not this time." The words hung in the air like a crack of thunder. Melanie's face froze, my mother's eyes widened, and my father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. For the first time, I felt the balance of power tilt ever so slightly in my favor. In that instant, I knew there was no turning back. The history of unspoken sacrifices had finally found its voice, and I was done letting it be buried in silence. What I was about to do next would change everything, not just for me, but for the way my family saw me forever. The air around the dining table grew heavy after my words. Melanie froze with her glass halfway to her lips, the smile slipping from her face like a mask that no longer fit. My mother gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest, as though I had shouted profanity instead of simple truth. My father leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening, a man caught between loyalty to his favorite child and the discomfort of watching his other daughter finally refuse to be silent. The children had stopped their chatter, their forks poised in midair, eyes wide as they looked between the adults for cues they did not understand. Melanie set her glass down with a sharp clink and forced a laugh that fooled no one. "Rachel, why would you say something like that? Of course you'll help. You love these kids. You've always been there for us. It's who you are." Her voice dripped with the same assumption that had shackled me for years. She was not asking me for help. She was declaring it as though my life had been signed away at birth. I felt my fingers curl against the edge of the table, steadying myself against the tide of frustration that threatened to burst. My chest tightened, but my voice came out calm, deliberate. "I do love them, but love doesn't mean I have to raise them for you. You and your husband chose to have children. I never chose this role." For a moment, no one spoke. Then my mother broke the silence, her tone sharp with disbelief. "Rachel, you don't mean that. Families help each other. That's what we do. How could you sit there and say you won't be there for your sister?" Her eyes were wide, her lips pressed tight as if my refusal was the true scandal of the evening, not the fact that Melanie had created yet another life she could not handle. I looked directly at her, refusing to flinch. "I've been there, Mom. For every late-night call, for every weekend, for every doctor's visit. I've been there so much that I can't remember the last time I lived a life that was actually mine." My voice wavered just slightly, but I pushed forward. "You keep calling it helping, but it's not help when it's expected. It's not support when it's demanded." Melanie's face twisted, her cheeks flushing crimson. "You're being dramatic. You make it sound like we forced you. You could have said no at any time." That laughable claim hit me like a slap. My pulse roared in my ears as years of buried resentment surged forward. "Said no? Every time I tried to, Mom told me to stop being selfish. Dad said I was stronger than you. And you, Melanie, you dropped your kids off without even asking because you knew I wouldn't turn them away. You never gave me the chance to say no." The words cracked through the room like lightning. My father shifted in his chair, finally speaking, his voice low. "Rachel, maybe this isn't the right time." "No, Dad." I cut in, surprising myself with the firmness in my tone. "The right time never comes. That's how this keeps happening. Every holiday, every birthday, every so-called family gathering turns into another excuse to use me. Tonight is just the latest chapter." The room felt smaller, as though the walls themselves were listening. My mother's eyes shone with unshed tears, though whether they were for me or for Melanie, I could not tell. Melanie, however, had no such conflict. She slammed her hand against the table, rattling the silverware. You think you're some kind of martyr? You act like you're the victim here, but you've always loved playing the hero. Don't act like you didn't want this attention. Her accusation stung, not because it was true, but because it was the exact opposite of the truth. I had never wanted attention. I had wanted freedom. I had wanted recognition that my time and my sacrifices mattered. But Melanie could not understand that, not when she had been shielded from consequences her entire life. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping low enough that every word cut with precision. I never wanted to be the hero. I wanted to be your sister, but you only ever saw me as free childcare, free money, free labor, and I'm finished. The children squirmed in their chairs, the tension too thick for them to ignore. My father cleared his throat again, his voice uneasy. Maybe we can discuss this later, away from the table. But it was too late for later. I had opened the wound, and closing it again would only let it fester. No, Dad. This is the table where it always happens. This is where we pretend everything is fine, where we cover up the cracks with polite smiles and pie. If I don't say it now, it'll never be said. The weight of my words hung in the air, pressing down on everyone present. Melanie's lips trembled as though she wanted to shout, but no sound came out. My mother's hand shook as she dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. My father sat rigid, torn between defense and denial. And me? For the first time, I felt light, as though speaking the truth had peeled away a layer of chains I had been dragging for years. I reached for my glass of water, my hand steady. The children began whispering quietly to one another, their young minds sensing the storm, even if they could not name it. I sipped, then set the glass down with care. My voice was calm when I spoke again, though inside my heart pounded like a drum. I love those kids. I always will. But from now on, being their mother is your job, Melanie. Not mine. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade. Melanie's eyes blazed with fury. My mother shook her head in disbelief, and my father's gaze fell to his plate, unwilling to meet mine. And in that suffocating quiet, I knew the confrontation was far from over. What would follow would test the limits of loyalty, blood, and the definition of family itself. Melanie was the first to break the silence. Her chair scraped against the hardwood floor as she pushed back and stood, her eyes flashing with disbelief and rage. You're unbelievable, Rachel. After everything I've gone through, after everything I've sacrificed, you're going to turn on me like this? Her voice cracked, not from sadness, but from fury, the kind of fury born from someone unaccustomed to being told no. She pressed her hand against her stomach as if the gesture itself would shield her from accountability. I stayed seated, my fingers lightly resting on the rim of my water glass. Sacrificed? The word came out sharper than I intended. You've made choices, Melanie. Choices that you expect everyone else to clean up after. I've been carrying the weight of those choices for years. I'm done. My mother quickly rose, rushing to Melanie's side like a reflex. She placed a protective arm around her and shot me a look of disappointment so heavy it almost felt rehearsed. Rachel, your sister is pregnant. She doesn't need this kind of stress right now. How can you be so cruel? Her words cut deep, not because I believed them, but because I had heard them in so many forms my entire life. Cruel, selfish, ungrateful. Those were the labels handed to me whenever I tried to set boundaries. I clenched my jaw and forced myself not to shrink under the weight of her glare. My father finally spoke, his voice low but edged with authority. Enough. This isn't the time for fighting. Rachel, if you can't say something supportive, maybe you shouldn't say anything at all. I turned to him, my heart pounding in my chest. That's exactly the problem, Dad. I've been saying nothing for years. I've swallowed every ounce of frustration to keep the peace, while Melanie got to live however she wanted. Silence is what kept me trapped here. The room grew tense again, every word hanging in the air like a thread ready to snap. The children whispered nervously, sensing the fracture in the adult's world. Melanie's husband shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, his eyes fixed firmly on his plate as though invisibility would save him. Melanie's tears finally spilled over, though they seemed more like weapons than grief. You hate me, she accused, her voice trembling. You've always hated me because I'm not like you, because I don't live by your boring rules. I don't hate you, I said softly, though my voice carried. I hate the way you've treated me. I hate that you've turned my love for your children into a leash around my neck. And I hate that everyone here pretends it's normal. My mother shook her head violently, her voice rising. Stop it. Rachel, you're tearing this family apart. That was the breaking point. I slammed my hand on the table, silverware clattering against plates, startling even myself with the sound. No, I'm not tearing it apart. I'm finally telling the truth. This family was broken long before tonight. I'm just the only one willing to admit it. The words sent shockwaves through the room. My father's face turned ashen, his authority stripped bare. My mother held Melanie tighter, as if clutching a lifeline. Melanie herself stood frozen, her eyes wide, her mouth parted in disbelief. For years, I had been cast as the quiet one, the dependable one, the sister who never caused trouble. But now the dam had burst, and there was no turning back. I leaned forward, my voice steady but pulsing with years of suppressed pain. I've missed promotions at work because I had to pick up your kids, Melanie. I've ended relationships because boyfriends couldn't handle that I was raising children who weren't mine. I've drained my savings account, paying for things you and your husband refused to cover. And every time I complained, I was told to stop being selfish. Tell me, how is that fair? Melanie shook her head as tears streamed down her cheeks, but she offered no defense. My mother's lips parted as if to scold me again, but even she seemed momentarily at a loss for words. My father's gaze dropped to his plate, his silence louder than any denial. The children stared, wide-eyed and confused, their forks abandoned. I felt a pang of guilt at their presence, but it was fleeting. They deserved to see the truth, too. They deserved to know that love should not come at the cost of erasing yourself. Finally, Melanie whispered, her voice trembling. So what? You're just walking away? You're abandoning us? I shook my head, my resolve firm. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm refusing to be abandoned myself. You have a husband, Melanie. You have parents who dote on you. You are not alone. But I refuse to keep sacrificing my life while you make the same mistakes again and again. The silence that followed was suffocating, but it was different this time. It wasn't the silence of avoidance or repression. It was the silence of truth settling in, heavy and undeniable. My mother's face hardened, her disappointment now mixed with something like fear. My father rubbed his temples, looking 10 years older than he had an hour ago. Melanie sat slowly back down, her shoulders trembling, her glow of triumph from earlier gone, replaced by a hollow vulnerability. For the first time, I did not rush to comfort her. I did not soften my words or offer to take back the weight of the confrontation. I simply sat there, steady and unflinching, while the family around me struggled to adjust to a world where I was no longer their silent safety net. The dinner ended in a haze of silence. No one touched the pie cooling on the counter, and no one asked for second helpings of chicken. Melanie kept her eyes fixed on her plate, pushing food around with her fork, while my mother whispered soft reassurances into her ear, as if she were a child needing comfort. My father said little, only sighing heavily, his shoulders slumped with the weight of conflict he could not control. The children fidgeted restlessly, sensing the storm they had just witnessed, but too young to fully understand its meaning. I excused myself early, gathering my coat from the rack by the door. The night air outside was crisp, biting against my skin, yet strangely refreshing. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without the invisible weight pressing against my chest. Driving home, the streetlights stretched across the windshield like golden ribbons, guiding me away from a house that had always demanded too much. My heart still pounded from the confrontation, but beneath the nervous energy was something deeper, relief. The following week was eerily quiet. No texts asking if I could babysit for just a few hours. No phone calls at midnight begging me to rush over because the kids couldn't sleep. The silence was both unsettling and liberating. I found myself with free evenings for the first time in years. I cooked dinner for myself, lingered over books I had abandoned, even signed up for a dance class I had always put off. My life, once shaped entirely around Melanie's chaos, was beginning to take shape on my own terms. But silence never lasts forever. My mother eventually called, her tone a mix of guilt and gentle reprimand. "Rachel," she said, "you know family means sacrifice. Maybe you were too harsh. Melanie is going through so much." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. "Mom, I have sacrificed enough. If Melanie is going through so much, it's because of choices she keeps making. She has to take responsibility. I won't be her safety net anymore." There was a long pause on the other end, then a sigh. "You've changed." Her words were meant to sting, but instead they made me smile. Yes, I had changed. I had finally chosen myself. Days later, Melanie sent a text. It was short, almost clipped. "I didn't realize how much I leaned on you. I'll figure it out." There was no apology, no admission of guilt, but it was the closest thing to acknowledgement I had ever received from her. And strangely, it was enough. Not because it fixed the past, but because it confirmed something I had known all along. She had always relied on me because I allowed it. By refusing to step into the role again, I forced her to find another way. The children still called me Aunt Rachel, still ran into my arms when they saw me at family gatherings, and I still loved them with every fiber of my being. But I no longer let that love be weaponized against me. I visited on my own terms, shared joy without obligation, and finally felt like an aunt instead of a second mother. The difference was subtle but life-changing. Looking back now, I see the entire dinner not as a breaking point, but as a turning point. That night at the table, when my voice finally broke through years of silence, I learned that boundaries are not walls to shut people out. They are doors, clear and strong, that define where you end and another person begins. Without them, love rots into resentment. With them, love can breathe again. The lesson I carry is simple yet powerful. Saying no does not make you unkind. Saying no makes room for your yes to mean something real. For too long, I believed that love required sacrifice without end, but love without balance is not love at all. It is servitude. And the moment I reclaimed my boundaries, I reclaimed my dignity. So here I am, sharing my story with you, not to paint myself as a victim, but to remind you that you have permission to draw your own lines. If you've ever felt crushed under the weight of family expectations, know this: you are not selfish for wanting freedom. You are not cruel for demanding respect, and you are not unworthy of love simply because you refuse to be used. If my story resonated with you, if you saw even a fragment of your own struggles in my words, I invite you to stay connected. There are countless untold stories about family, sacrifice, and the courage it takes to break free. By subscribing, you'll join me on this journey of truth-telling and healing, where we confront the hardest parts of family life and discover the lessons buried within them. Together, we can learn that sometimes the bravest act of love is choosing yourself.